morning. A very good morning to everyone on a wonderful Sunday. All right. Today, actually, the COVID thing is really never ending. Right. Very good morning, Tawan. And I was thinking about all this happening, as well as a lot of people actually talk about my intended leaving of this country. Maybe not for permanent. I do not know when I will come back, right? But a lot of people are actually asking me whether I will stay back to contest next election and all that. But as you know, Singaporeans are very funny. Right? They do not like people who fly out of Singapore and come back to contest. So that is very unlikely. All right, very unlikely. And I must say whatever I written about my leaving so far is actually right from my heart, right? A bit emotional. I shouldn't be that emotional, well, but it is indeed something that I wanted to say for a long time, right? Now, whatever we face today, the pandemic, this is actually not the pandemic of the unvaxxed, not the pandemics of the vax, right? It's actually the pandemic of the PAP rule. Okay, the pandemic of a misnomer political system, which actually brings us to this situation that we are facing. Right? We can see whatever the ruling party have done wrong or right, right? It was supported by all the apparatus, whether it's the rules, the laws, the propaganda machineries, that is unstoppable. And I have to say this: God help us, Buddha help us, if they really get it wrong. Being whether the vaccination, whether how they have treated our medical people, right? And when I reflect upon all these happenings, I came to one conclusion. One very straightforward conclusion. It's actually karma. Nothing happens in solo. Nothing happens as an unexpected random incident. We are facing this prolonged situation. It's because of what we have created out of Singapore, the political system that allows such decisions, such leadership to be in place. And this is not a coincidence or an isolated situation that we are facing. Right? Now, shall I explain this? I explain through my political ideology and what I see as what is wrong with Singapore's system and what Singaporeans have been voting or consciously allows this system to perpetuate. Right? Now, before I comes into politics, active opposition politics in 2001, I've spent 8 years, even more. Well, you can consider 1 decade actually. In 1991, I went into NUS to study economics and statistics. I've spent about more than 8 years actually, right, to study policies. As economic students in Singapore, we are very fortunate because all our lectures, all our studies of theories are based on what is happening right then or going to happen. For example, before GST comes about, before this ERP comes about, we actually study about them. The logic behind road pricing, the logic behind value-added tax. GST is a value-added tax. The pros and cons and all that. So we spend a lot of time in that deliberation of understanding what is going on. Right? I'm very fortunate to have my learning in NUS during that period of time. It's golden. Right? And after I graduated with honors degrees, I continue to expound on the happenings because what I have studied actually is coming into fruition in terms of implementation of GST, implementation of ERP, and the asset enhancement, right? And I see a lot of things are wrong, but the newspaper, the politicians, the opposition politicians are not actively debating about it in Parliament, whether it's in Parliament or otherwise. Of course, we do not have new media back then. I will cut them some slacks on that, right? But the media is full of propaganda. And that's why I decided to come into politics 2001 after I see that the Workers' Party, the SDA, and the Cham Sitong are actually affected by the 911 incident. PAP took the opportunity of fear, politics of fear, harmed them, and we nearly lost all seats. Okay, very close shave, right? But throughout these years, 20 years of active opposition politics engagement, I've seen a lot of people come and go. I've seen a lot of people who have an interest, so-called, to be in the politics. Well, in the first decade, it's very rare, especially before 2006 election. Everybody is very frightened, right? Everybody is very frightened when I was in Workers' Party. But we persevere. But if you ask me, what are the common ideological basis of our existence in a party, a single party like Workers' Party? I can tell you there's none. Nobody is interested to talk about political ideology. Nobody actually knows exactly what they stand for. Okay? Some will say, I dislike PAP for this, I dislike PAP for that. Right? But nobody exactly know what they actually stands for. The only common denominator was we dislike PAP. And even then, we do not know exactly what are so evil about PAP. Well, of course, we will talk about democracy, rule of law, checks and balances. But what exactly is check and balances? Or rather, what is exactly politics? Politics in excess. I left Workers' Party after the January election 2006, in spite of the fact that we have done a very good, let me say this, also propaganda, okay, very good image building, rebranding, putting forth a platform, regenerating the old party, the Hammer, right? But I felt lost because there's no guiding principles of our existence as an opposition, the biggest, so-called the biggest opposition party back then, right? So actually, I wanted to retire from there then, okay? Because I see it is karma. Because for the past 20 years or 2 decades or 3 decades, we lost our political education as a people. Now, PAP came into power because of a very strong politically charged environment. And that provides a political education. What is right and what is wrong? What are we against? Anti-colonial rules, why it is unfair, and so on and so forth. So the political elites back then, like Lim Chin Siong, even Lee Kuan Yew, comes into power, comes into public narrative, what is wrong with the system, and they are very politicized. They understand what goes on, what are exploitation of our labors, and they fought the political battles. That is an environment, a vibrancy that created an environment for them to be politically educated, right? Knowingly or unknowingly. And even the normal people back then understand what is politics, what is wrong with the system, and they want change. But after PAP came into power, they did something even worse than the British colonial rule, right? They cut down the opposition in sizes. They ban all the decisions, chase out people, even deprive people who do not agree with them their citizenship. People who have contributed to the nation building, contributed to building the first proper national university, university, Nanta, for our nation. And that's all they have done in order to consolidate their power. Of course, in exchange, Singaporeans given them the free hand to do this. Because in exchange for prosperity, stability. And that is exactly what I've said in my little article. Because as a human being, we want stability, we want prosperity, right? We want a stable life, an economic rectification, opportunities. And we exchange our rights, our political ideologies of building a democratic society for that. Well, I cannot say they are wrong, I cannot say they are right, but that luckily, the pioneer generation of political leaders in PAP, within the PAP, they are still have some sort of checks and balances. I will explain it, all right? Well, in particular, within PAP, right? Not everyone agrees with what Lee Kuan Yew is doing, the Iron Fist. Goh Keng Swee didn't really agree, right? Some of the pioneers, founders didn't agree, but they keep themselves in check. Constant private debates about what should be done and what should not be done. That is behind the doors, closed doors. Right? And of course, they are relatively clean. I'm not saying that corruption is non-existent. They are relatively clean. And we have our prosperity for the 70s and the 80s. But when it comes to this stage, the system that was created by Lee Kuan Yew cannot be sustainable in the long run. He actually knows about it. Why? He actually made a point that if one day there's some political routes, which he means that only opposition can be the bad guys, come into power. This system will allow them to do whatever they want and will be done for the whole country. Now, a system that is resilient, that works, that is sustainable, would not end up in that situation, even if some stupid guys, some evil guys come into power. Right? That means he understands that the system he has created, a high concentration of power within a few political elites, can be doomed if it falls in the wrong hands. Because checks and balances becomes non-existent after the old guards he has forced to retire from politics affected the new generation of political elites that comes in the Goh Chok Tong era, the Tony Tan era, then comes to Lee Hsien Loong era. Right? They are no longer able to stand together to say that we are the equals. You are just the first among the equals. And Lee Kuan Yew was just the first among the equals. Equals in terms of what? Because they have contributed to the same political process of fighting against the colonial rules and so-called the communist threat, right? So these political systems still stands now, or even worse, being tightened by the various tweaking and meddling with our constitution and our laws. That's why we have POFMA, we have FICA, which are actually the signs of dictatorship, signs of tyrant, the rules of tyrants. But the opposition parties in the parliament, have they been effective enough to debate about all this? Although they are actually overwhelmed by the numbers. But did we rigorously go against this? Not for the Workers' Party. I'm sad to say I've helped to create the very opposition parties that becomes ineffective in parliament. Totally ineffective. Whether it's on SICA, right? Now, this is why when I was brought back into politics again in 2011, in 2008 by NSP, back time the chief is Sebastian, I was a bit reluctant, but I said, okay, never mind. We will try. We will try again to build another alternative. Because using the co-driver concept, if the driver sleep, the co-driver is supposed to slap the driver. But what happens if both of them are sleeping? The back passenger have to slap both of them. That is a concept. But I made the same mistake again. The people that came into politics back then, in 2011 election, they do not have a clear idea of what democracy means. Sometimes they even do not have a clear idea of what's wrong with many of the policies that PAP is pushing up. Now, PAP is good in policy making and propaganda and whitewashing these bad policies to repackage it to look good. They have spent a lot of money in PRs, public relationship. The public statements that are made by their ministries are very well written, cover all angles. Right? A bad thing can be written into a good thing. Many people do not really understand that, but people like us who are very critical in thinking, who actually can see that. And we are dismayed because they are so good in repackaging policies to sell to the people. For example, asset enhancement, HDB. It should be a bad thing if your HDB prices keep going up. It means that your future generation will suffer. It is such a simple logic, right? We give the PAP government the power to acquire land at very dirt cheap price. And we expect them to actually take care of us, not only us, but the future generations in terms of public housing, cheap public housing. But they turn it around, repackage, rising HDB prices is asset enhancement. It's good for you. You make money. But who pays? Somebody have to pay for your profit. That is your future generation. Very simple question. They just stopped out there. But of course, the opposition parties back then did not have the capability or the understanding of the mechanism of economics, or what we call the ethics between the trade-offs. They actually have broken their promises, or rather the social contract with Singaporeans. But they have hidden that. And they keep telling you that you can depend on HDB for retirement and all that. Actually, I'm the very first one who pointed out that is bullshit. Right? I've studied through and through. I've warned people, even Loh Tia Kang. Loh Tia Kang say it's good, what? People like it. I say, wow, my goodness, I cannot believe even the old seasoned politician like Loh Tia Kang actually brushed it off back in the 2005, before the 2006 election. Actually, I wanted to make that an election issue in 2006. And the reason why I came back in 2011 or 2008 to join NSP and bring up this issue again is because I feel that my mission back then is unfulfilled. Because this is my pet topic, the HDB. It will affect future generation after generations beyond PAP rule if we allow that to happen. And true enough, in 2011, a lot of young people back then cannot find a decent home, or have to pay hefty 30 years or 35 years mortgage loan for simple public housing. And that is the day of reckoning. And it's still happening right now. Although they admit that, okay, this HDB is a big problem. We have a long-term plan and all that. But did they actually solve the problem? They did not. They did not. We can still see price rocketing more than double or triple, or even 5 times beyond the reach of a lot of people. Well, a lot of policies have long-term implication that most people who are short-term in sight will not recognize. And what PAP need to do is just to throw a bit of carrots and sweets. People will buy their ideas. That is why I say they have a very strong public relationship mechanism behind them. Well, maybe people say that it will not affect me. It will not even affect my daughter. My daughter is, I'm very sure she will not be affected. Right? Why should I care? When you comes into politics, be it a PAP, the ruling party, or opposition members, your job is about the livelihood and the lives of all the people, not only your generation, not only your class, not only your level of wealthy people. And that is what we call the balance. What are checks and balances? The balances is such that you must balance the interest of everyone. You do not tweak the balance without any good reasoning. Just like what they have come out now, those who are HDB in the prime areas, right? The singles cannot buy it. Well, a lot of people do not find anything wrong with that. But I say that is actually imbalance in the policy consideration. Why shouldn't they be given the opportunity to choose where they want to live? They are not actually asking for any helps. They are just asking for equal opportunities. Why should the right of the equal opportunities be taken off? And that is PAP, the style of PAP. Right? And exactly, it is the same reasoning that they use for public safety, for public good. No, we are going to sacrifice this group of people, just like what they have done to the unvaxxed. Deprive them of essential services from the mall, right? Or even deprive them of jobs. Officially say that employers can sack them. You may not see what's wrong, the similarities between these two groups, but they are exactly the same. The problems lies with there is no balance. And not even the opposition parties' members in parliament actually knows what's wrong with it. So if you are telling me that you want to go into parliament to be the checks and balances, are you being effective? You do not even know what is imbalance. That is why I decided, after I looking at it, I laugh. I feel very sad. Right? And I decided to make this the issue of the day. Checks and balances. Whatever political system that we decide to build for our nation, it should be sustainable. It should last beyond our lives. Right? Well, democratic ideas are simple to recite. Rhetorics, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. What does it mean? In reality, how do you prevent power from corrupting the people in power in absolute terms? There is some things that we, as the citizens, as well as the politicians, political activists, or engaged or players, should actually keep in mind. Lee Kuan Yew has talked about philosopher king. The ideal of a system is to have a philosopher king to run the country. Philosopher king means that he has everything right in concept, in views. So he will be the best people to decide what is the best, the good for the society, for the nation. But how many philosopher kings do we have in history, in ancient history? Well, he might think that he is the philosopher king, but is his son a philosopher king? Far from it. Right? We cannot depend on the randomness of the arrival of a philosopher king to run the country well. We must prepare a system that prevents the crooks from messing it up like what is right now, what exactly they are doing right now, to bring sufferings and death to our people. Well, the Western democracy talk about the separation of three powers. And that is the basis of democracy. Because we cannot trust anyone with power for too long. That's why we want to separate the powers so that nobody can 一手遮天, have a massive concentration of power to do what he likes and what he didn't like. Right? That is a concept of the separation of three powers. What are the three powers? Judiciary. You have somebody else up there will judge you, the law. Right? The executive. That means the political elites, the ministers, and the legislative, right? The congressmen, the parliamentary, the MPs who make the laws. But is that enough? It's apparently not enough. Why? Now, people have a misunderstanding of the Chinese dynasties, right? And people thought that Dr. Sun Yat-sen, right, Sun Zhongshan, is only a hero in overthrowing the Qing dynasty and nothing else. Actually, that is a misunderstanding of the man himself. His greatness is beyond politicking and overthrowing an old dynasty. Right? Now, I have come into contact of the literature, the ideals, the ideology of Dr. Sun. I am very impressed. Why? If you study Chinese history or the world history, you will have realized that in the ancient world, China has always been regarded as the most advanced country or empire in their contemporary people, partners, contestants, competitors. Why? And a lot of countries want to emulate the way the political system was set up in ancient China. Right? Of course, we are actually brainwashed by seeing a lot of dramas about how the system in ancient China is bad and all that, corruption and all that. It's true, there are corruptions. But no, it is not all that bad. Any political system, the ruling system, must be able to select the best people, the smartest people with the heart. That's why 孔子为 says, 仁者为王. Right? You must have the heart, the empathy of the people, so that you can run the country for the people. Although they do not have the mechanism of voting, but they have the scholar system to select people. So the system of selection is not by voting, it's by the scholar system. Right? And most of the time, problems arise when the scholar system is being corrupted. And it becomes a system. By right, the scholar system admits anyone from any class, whether you are the royal families, whether you are the peasant, you can actually engage, enroll in a scholar's examination and be selected, have an opportunity to be selected to be the governance, to be part of the leadership, to govern the country, the empire. But when the system being corrupted by the rich, by the powerful, by the royalties, those are already in power, it becomes a system of rent seeking. Rent seeking. A lot of people have this misconception of rent seeking. They thought rent seeking is only about economics. No, we only pay to buy house to rent out. But rent seeking have another meaning. It means that 攀关系, you are using your relationship to the power to get into position, to get the role, to civil, whether it's a civil service position or higher. So in the system of the ancient China, the scholar system is important. And this have been acknowledged by Lee Kuan Yew actually. Right? But he used it in a way to discredit democracy, the system of democracy. He said, oh, our system of scholarship, PSC scholarship, the president's scholarship, whatever, is the best in selecting the best to run the country. Yes and no. Why? Why would I say yes and no? If the system, the examination system, the scholarship system is independent of interference from the power and the rich, it works because everyone have the chance. Even if you are peasant, you have a chance to climb the ladder, the social ladder, to become the elites, the ruling elites. But if it's being corrupted by the interference, just like what happens in the ancient China, then you have a problem. Right? Another features of the ancient Chinese dynasty, the empire, they have the system of Yan Guan. What is Yan Guan? Yan Guan is the opposition within the ruling court, the emperor's court. He is given the power to speak his mind, even can criticize the emperor for any wrongdoings. Impeachment, that is the power of impeachment. He can walk around the countries to see what's wrong, whether any officials have been doing wrong things, and impeach them in the emperor's court. Right? The same. The system supposed to work that way. But when the system is corrupt, influenced by other powerful politicians, ministers, the system collapses. But it actually explains why ancient Chinese empires last much longer than any Western or any contemporary empires during that time. The system of checks and balances, whether it's effective or not, it still exists. The system of selection of people who are able to lead, not only because you are vigor enough, you have a strong arm static, you can conquer the world, then you can rule the world. No, that is a Western style. Right? One lord fight against another lord, conquer his territory. I'm become the rulers. And there's no system of selection, only the royalties. The rent-seeking mentality is much more serious in the Western feudal system. And that is why the Chinese system actually can have 200 years, 300 years, lasted much longer than anything in the Western world. But Sun Yat-sen actually came to this realization. The French Revolution taught him the importance of democracy, ideas of separation of powers. But the three powers is not enough. It should include the five powers. The other two powers is what? The power of impeachment. That means the CPIB, or in Hong Kong they call it the ICAC, should be independent. Right? The Auditor General should be independent. These are the powers of impeachment. In modern days, the power of impeachment includes the media. The media have a role to have the power of impeachment. Right? So the other powers is actually examination, which I call the selection, which includes our electoral elections, general elections, plus the selection of positions for the civil service. But look at what is happening in our system. Back in the 70s or even in the early 80s, no spouse of the ministers will hold any important post within the government or quasi-government. That is why Mrs. Lee Kuan Yew, the wife of Lee Kuan Yew, have never have a position in the government at all. Because he set the example as the leader. If you want to stay clean, you should not have the conflict of interest. You should prevent the situation of having a conflict of interest. When you are the government, you are the rulers, you are the ministers, while you have your spouse, your son, whoever in the civil service. But after the pioneer generation of leaders of the PAP retired, he installed his own son as a minister. That is the biggest mistake he have made in his whole life. And thereafter, if you look at what is happening in the ministers and the spouse and the relatives, they're all over the civil service. The Prime Minister himself, the wife is a powerful woman running Temasek Holdings, the sovereign fund owned by the Ministry of Finance. And the son is also in the civil service. That is exactly what evolves out of the Chinese dynasty without the separation of powers. And this is only the Prime Minister alone. Other ministers, Heng Swee Keat's spouse, Ong Ye Kung's spouse. You go and dig. That is whether or not it is by their own marriage or not, that already give a system of rent seeking. And that is why when I thought that my PAC topic had been done in 2011 general election, I was happy to retire. But then again, right? When LKY died in 2015, I see the system had not improved. I have to go beyond my PAC topic. I have to realize what is wrong with the whole system. I came out with my help of my ex-comrades in NSP. I built the People's Power Party based on the exact ideology which is modified to suit the modern system of impeachment, of selection for the government. The roots lies with the corrupt system, which used to be perfect. It's just like the old Chinese dynasty. When it first started, every dynasty in China, when it first started, is perfect. But when it goes down the road, it started to be corrupted by the powers. And people have to realize, whoever comes into politics have to realize, you must have a very strong commitment and conviction to get this right. What is politics? Politics is not just to become the opposition leader in parliament, leader of opposition in parliament. It's not even about becoming the prime minister. It's about setting the right system that is sustainable for stable extension of our civilization and prosperity for our people, opportunities for all, and that is balance. We do not use democracy of voting of, or even opinions of the majority as a yardstick to be the tyrant of the minorities. When you do that, that is actually imbalance. Right? And as politicians, whether you are in parliament or not, a lot of politicians have this wrong perception. I must beware about my votes. Okay? If I speak up for this small group of people, I will lose the votes of the majority. That is always the consideration, political calculations. I can tell you, it always has been that so. Right? And that is exactly the reason why Lau Tek Kiang didn't want to bring up the HDB asset enhancement problems. Because he said everybody is happy. If I go against it, people will vote against me. That is the subtle reasoning behind it. Political calculations of votes. You are not doing the things right. Neither are you doing the right things. Similarly, nobody speak up for those who chose to be single. As if being single is a sin. To be discriminated, to be deprived of the same opportunity from other people. Right? Nobody spoke up for the unvaxxed just because they chose not to take the vaccine. Because they are afraid that, majority of people are pro-vaccine because everybody took the vaccine. That's why I should not speak up. They disregard of the human rights basis. And they lost the balance. How could a person who lost the balance to claim that he is going into politics because of checks and balances? In modern terms, what are checks and balances? Checks and balances depends on the separation of powers. Does it only occurs in parliament? No. It should be implemented within the institution of governance. Like I said, the CPIB should not come under the Prime Minister office. It should be independent or put it under the President office. Auditor General should not be under Ministry of Finance, because Ministry of Finance might have problems also itself. It should come under the President office. Right? And there are a lot of conflicts of interest. For example, I have brought this up before. How can the same person be the Minister of Law as well as the Minister of Home Affairs? Home Affairs is the execution of the laws. The Ministry of Law is the legislative part of the law. Right? How could it actually be the same people, same person? There is a conflict of interest. That is not a check and balances. That is not a separation of powers. And also, the Ministry of Law took care of the judges. I say put the appointment of judges under the president. In fact, the PSC should come under the president, so that no other ministers or rich people can corrupt the system. And that is exactly what I'm fighting for. Never mind of policies here and there. Policies can change over time. But the system of rule and governance should not be measured by these monkeys. As and when they liked, put up a FICA. FICA is actually against the concept of checks and balances. Really. It's not just about how good FICA will prevent foreign interference. It's about how bad you have breached the concept of democracy, the separation of powers, and checks and balances. As I said, we have no philosopher king, always. We can only presume that power will corrupt absolutely, or people who are embedded with high concentration of powers. And when you let these systems goes down, and a route government came in, people with very bad intention comes into power, we are doomed. There is no turning back, except for revolution. And the purpose of democracy is to prevent revolution. And that is actually what the French Revolution have taught us. You know, we do not want a system to come to a point that only brutal force can remove those who are harming the whole nation. It is something for everybody talk about, think about. And that's why I think what we are facing right now, in this instance of the pandemic, strong arm tactics, propaganda, because the media is not in good separation of powers, not put in checks and balances. Look at what they are putting up. Very slanted view, even when it comes to science, just because they want to suit their public narrative. Right? They are not used to people saying no. They are not used to people who say otherwise against what they are propagating. That's why I say this is a pandemic of PAP rule. It's not a pandemic of the vaccinated. It's not a pandemic of the unvaxxed. It could be solved quite easily. But it's a pandemic of PAP rule because it exposes all the problems of the system, the political system that is have been perpetuated by the PAP rulers. Even so, in the worst direction. And I can foresee, this is my other prediction. The ground sentiment is very bad, right? People may not see it is the problems of the whole political system, but people only see that they are hurt financially, economically. Businesses have been closed down, small businesses especially, F&B, retail, right? People are dying. I'm not even sure whether the figures are right, because I drive around, I keep seeing funerals, right? Tentages put up across the nation, across the HDB heartland. Okay? People are suffering. And people do not vote rationally. When they're angry, they will vote against PAP. Actually, that should not be the case. A well-matured democratic society should not be in that state of mind that you only vote against the ruling party because you are angry. No. Right? But this is Singapore. The PAP's response will be remove all competition. Remove people like Goh Meng Sing, who are gaining public recognition, and who are actually shown to be talking more sense than the big hoo-ha, the big mistakes they are making throughout the 2 years. It's a prolonged crisis. It's unlike the past crisis, a financial crisis. You throw money, you can solve. This is a crisis that is formed by a small, microscopic, invisible little virus that you cannot stop. So I can see the big hammer coming in my way, right? Or rather, the big lightning. And I will not be spared. None of the opposition will be spared, maybe except Workers' Party. People who speak against their madness, their incompetency, with well reasoning, will not be spared. And that is the main reason why I want to leave this country. You see, there is a reality in Singapore. People can make noise in coffee shop. People can talk this and talk that. But when it comes to the crunch, nobody will stand up with you. That has been shown in JBJ, Dr. Chi, and so many others. Tan Liang Hong, Francis Seow. These are from the establishment that turned against them. And this is the reality of Singaporeans. Well, rightfully or wrongfully, that is the case. Well, I should not say wasted. I have spent almost 30 years in this political mud slugging. I made mistakes, right? Grave mistakes. I have fulfilled some of my missions, although eventually it was left unattended again, like the HDB issues, like the lack of infrastructure when you have a great increase in the population. And make no mistake about this, policies is always forward-looking, right? When they did not build enough infrastructure, like the hospitals, like the housing, during the early 2000, we are suffering right now. It took them 10 years to build one hospital. Okay? And now they're complaining because of this epidemic, they do not have enough beds. But whose fault? I can say that I have pointed out that you can't even have enough hospital beds or resources for your own population during peaceful time. How are you going to manage a pandemic of this size? That's why that is a pandemic of PAP rules. That is a pandemic of PAP rules. I may be a bit emotional about leaving this, right? But no, I'm not ready to shut down my party. For the reason why, let it be recorded in history. Such a party existed, and we are waiting for people to take over. Who actually agrees with the fundamentals of our political systems, and that is the ideology. Dr. Sunyesa have actually two major ideological thinking. One is the separation of five powers. The other is actually 三民主义. What is 三民主义? The three people's principles. Right? 民权民生 民主. What is this? 民主 means for the people, basically. 民权 means the power of the people. 民生 is people's livelihood. Very simple, but very important. Most of the people that comes into politics will lost their way. Totally lost their way. What they are in there for the money, for the prestige, or for the evil. People are for the futures, for the futures of political leadership, of political opposition, or ministers, or engaged activists that comes in. You must always think about this. It is always for the people. For civil rights, people's power, and for the people's livelihood. All the people's livelihood, not just a few people, not for the rich. Right? You must be in balance. So when I watch Ong Yi Kang talk about 中庸, I actually want to laugh. Do you know what is 中庸? Right? When you force people, no matter how small that group of people, to the edge, to the cliff, even to deprive them of the livelihood, you actually call that 中庸. My foot. You are the extremist. You have lost the balance. Right? I urge you, think about this. The problems that we face right now is bigger than the pandemic, is bigger than the COVID-19. It is our is the bigger problems of our political systems that we have allowed to perpetuate, to live, right? And to cultivate the tyrants in the PAP who disregard people's livelihood, all people's livelihood, who disregard civil liberties, people's power, the human rights, so-called, the basic rights, who disregard the people who gave them the power to rule. Think about it. Now, although I may not be in Singapore, I can be reached. You can PM me, you can email me. No problem. My People's Power Party will still exist, even to the last single digit. Right? Let me be written in history. Beside the Kuomintang in Taiwan, we have actually distorted what his founder have upheld as the baton or the light for the good governance. Let this be the second one in Asia. I do not intend to close it down. Right? So I will try my best before I leave. I'm leaving Singapore in January. And not so fast. I'll try my best to keep this live chat around, but I'm going to be very busy to make all the arrangements for my relocation. Right? I try my best to keep my live chat. And hopefully someone better than me will come forward to take this baton of responsibility. Okay, that's all, folks. Hopefully to see you on Tuesday. I have not decided yet whether I'm that free to do, because I have to take care of my comrades now. Right? Because Suffering, my chairman, unfortunately have a stroke. I'm taking care of him at the moment. So see you in due time. Thank you.